On this episode of Stories Behind the Grind, listen to my conversation with Adam Houlihan, founder of Prominence Global and a true leader when it comes to LinkedIn. We discuss what micro-niching is and why it's so important, the fundamentals of creating high-quality content, and how to optimize your time to build prominence on LinkedIn. My name is Aidan Vocolo, and here you will find business strategies, tips, and tactics that you can incorporate not only in your own venture, but your life, to help you simplify and strategically grow, scaling up the impact you are having in this world. Listen as I talk to creators, innovators, and game changers on what it takes to build an impactful business, uncovering their insights, strategies, and tips to help you increase profitability and develop a thriving team culture. Welcome to the Stories Behind the Grind podcast. Adam, thanks for coming on the Stories Behind the Grind podcast. It's great to have you on.
It's my pleasure. It's fantastic to be here with you.
Adam, you're the author of Amazon bestsellers, The LinkedIn Playbook, Social Media Secret Sauce, and the recently released Influencer. You're also the CEO of Web Traffic That Works, and you give businesses powerful tools to grow and accelerate their global footprint. Tell me, what were some of the pivotal moments in your history that led to where you were today?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was a kind of an interesting journey. Which really started almost 10 years ago now. But back at that time, I really didn't know anything about social media, and I think I had a Facebook account like most people, and that was about it. And I was running a company, and I was doing some research on sort of some global competitors, and seeing why those guys were doing really well. And it turned out to be that they were just good early adopters of social media. And so that really just piqued my interest, and I started deep diving into everything about social media and connecting with a lot of the world's influencers at the time. And I became pretty convinced that social media was really going to play an important role in the future of pretty much all businesses. So I kind of turned a passion into a obsession, and an obsession into a business. And then what I found was that I just really resonated personally with how LinkedIn worked, because it was a very, very difficult platform to master. And we ended up just 100% focusing on LinkedIn, and we now have a global team, 19 people work with us around the world, and a global client base as well.
In those early days, how did you, LinkedIn's obviously, more recently sort of grown to be a really, prominent tool, but in the earlier days when it wasn't as well known, or as, like you said, it was hard to master, how did you deal with the naysayers, or how did you deal with those people?
Look, I just didn't worry about them. We were getting great results ourselves, and so the proof was just kind of in the pudding. So we just kept doing our own sort of lead generation, and growth just came through what we were doing on LinkedIn. And obviously after a bit of time, people started to notice, and they started to reach out and go, clearly you guys know what you're doing, and can you help us? And of course, the release of the two books, like first the LinkedIn Playbook a few years ago, and then, as you said, more recently, just late last year, Influencer. And off the back of those, I've just get to spend cool time with guys like yourself, and on podcasts and in live. I do a lot of live events around the world, training for business owners and entrepreneurs, and it's kind of it was really just a proof in the pudding kind of concept.
Sure. So you sort of proved to yourself that you could do it yourselves, and then helped others do the same thing that you were doing. You demonstrated the results that you could get, and went from there.
Yeah, exactly that.
You mentioned you've written two books most recently, and there's been a couple of years in between. What significant changes have you seen in the LinkedIn platform between those two books, between the LinkedIn Playbook and your more recently released book, Influencer?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. I think if we drew a line in the sand as where LinkedIn really accelerated ahead was probably about the time when it was purchased by Microsoft. And given that Microsoft spent $26 billion to buy LinkedIn, clearly they saw huge future potential. But of course, with the backing of the capabilities of a company like Microsoft, they really started to develop the platform. And look, I won't say that every single thing they did was a positive. There's a lot of people who were jumping up and down in the early days because a lot of what was free on LinkedIn moved into paid subscriptions. So it did become, a platform where you needed to invest a little bit of money into it, not a lot, but some people saw that as a negative. But it's what I think has been the real evolution between, obviously, if you read the LinkedIn playbook, it's all about, positioning your profile and, etiquette and how you interact with people. And influencer is all about content and content creation. And that's really the major change, is LinkedIn has become a content platform that, if done well, can really position anybody, as a person of prominence or influence or whatever word you want to use within their industry. And that's what the people who are really doing well on LinkedIn, they're just, great content creators.
Yeah, I've seen that, I guess, just on my own profile going through. It's definitely, I guess back in the day, it used to be just for resumes, essentially, or that's how I used to view it anyway. If, you put your resume up there or, in your profile and you left it there. But, more recently, it's when you scroll through the newsfeed of LinkedIn, there's a lot of valuable content that can be shared. How can those putting content up, how can people be different? How can you break through the noise now that LinkedIn is becoming more heavily a content-driven platform and there's a lot of content going up there these days?
Yeah, it's there is a lot of content going up there, but there's still not a lot of really engaging content. So the big kind of mistake, I suppose, and the first thing that a lot of people think is that it's a content platform just like you might use on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and it's not the type of content that the people on LinkedIn are really going to resonate with. So the content that gets the cut through, as you say, is content that is really focused on a niche for starters. You got to really focus in on who the content is for and serve that consistently to that avatar, if you want to use a word, and that it's really just solving problems. It's helpful content. If you follow, my content, you'll see it's a mixture of video content and written content, visual content. But the high majority of it is just helpful tips and information. Well, in my case, about how to leverage LinkedIn. But in any other person's view would be just how somebody gets value out of whatever it is that that content creator does. And so essentially, you solve people's problems, and they want to work with you.
And it's a fantastic tool to do so, because you can follow people and interact. Not only share your content, but interact with others. What's your What's your advice for those looking to build prominence on LinkedIn?
Well, it's exactly that. It's a content play. You've got to be a consistent creator of content, and to give you some sort of numbers of what this really looks like. Roughly, right now, there's roughly about 630 million people on LinkedIn. Just 3 months ago, it was 610. So, 20 million new people have joined in the last 3 months. And that's a consistent sort of growth. But of those 630 million, there's only about 1 million, 1 million of 630 million who are consistent content creators. And probably of that million, less than 200,000, only 1/5 of them that really focus on really high quality content that works within this sort of concept of positioning that person with prominence. So when you do the numbers on that, it's way under 1% of all users of LinkedIn that are doing this exceptionally well. And often when I say that in live events, whatever, the room will be divided into two types. Some people say, well, that just tells me that LinkedIn's a waste of time. And then the other kind of half get it, where they say, wow, okay, so it's a target-rich environment if I just get it right. And of course, that's my view too.
What would your recommendation be for those? I mean, like you said, only, a small majority of that 1% are, high quality content creators. How can small business owners that may only have half an hour to an hour a day to dedicate to LinkedIn, what would your advice be to them to use that time effectively?
With an hour a day, if you're very, very strategic about how you spend your time, you can definitely get, a good outcome on LinkedIn. But the reality is that the people who are going to really get the massive amount of leverage of this they're probably going to spend a bit more time than that, or they're going to, get some help from their team or, external experts or whatever. And, as I said, it's really it's actually under half of 1% of people who are playing at this level. So an hour a day, you can definitely get a good return on the time invested, but that time needs to be very, very strategic, where probably half of that time is in content creation and the other half is obviously connecting with people and following up on messages and replying to people who engage on your content, that sort of thing.
Yeah, certainly valuable advice. It's good to hear that you can build up, just through your own time and effort, a reasonable profile on LinkedIn. But of course, if you want to take it to that next level, then obviously having a team behind you or, like you said, external support can be quite valuable in providing that extra assistance and cutting down the time that, as a business owner, you would naturally have to spend just to learn the platform. Sometimes it can be helpful to outsource it.
Yeah, and obviously it's something you'd only do after you've spent a little bit of time on there and you're getting some results, and you're confident that if you just step that up a level, that the return on that investment would be worthwhile. So and there's obviously lots of different ways that can be done. It could be as simple as an assistant that spends 2 or 3 hours a day at a much lower hourly rate than what your time's worth, that would make it worthwhile, right up to fully managed services like we do.
You mentioned earlier about really honing in on a niche or an avatar and going in reading your books talking about a micro niche. Can you explain what you mean by a micro niche and how would you recommend for people to sort of really hone in on what that means to them?
Sure. Look, it's a very important distinction. So say, for example, I could say to someone, "Oh, what do you do?" And they say, "I'm a photographer." Great, photographer's a niche, obviously, but within that niche, a photographer could specialise in portrait photography or weddings or wildlife or headshots or corporate. There's so many different aspects of that though any one of those is a micro niche. So, for example, if I said to the same person, what is it you do? And they said, I specialise in corporate headshots for people's social media profiles. Well, that's a micro niche. It's very, very clear what that person does. It doesn't also mean to say that's the only thing they do, but it would be the thing that they lead with as far as their marketing and positioning on a platform like LinkedIn. Similar to that, it could be a doctor. Well, okay, are you a general practitioner? Are you an orthodontist? Are you, a surgeon? Whatever. So it's a doctor is a niche, the surgeon is the micro niche, or even say brain surgeon would be the micro niche, very, very targeted in what it is you do. And pretty much every industry could have that. You could say something like an accountant. Accountancy is still very, very broad, but you can target that down under that into a much tighter niche. And as an example, a client of ours that we work with is an accountant, but he only he positions himself as only working with small to medium enterprises up to $2 million revenue. So he's very, very clear about who his client avatar is.
Now, like you said, that then helps with your marketing message. And when you're putting content out, you can really target what you're talking about to that niche or to that micro niche to really then, I guess that could be one way to cut through the noise instead of being general and saying you're an accountant or a doctor or a photographer, really sort of niching down and being quite targeted in how you communicate.
Yeah, there's a very true saying in marketing, which is if you try to appeal to everyone, you'll appeal to no one, because nobody really knows exactly what it is that you're about. So that's really what the concept of micro niching is about.
In your opinion, what holds people back from wanting to micro niche?
It's a great question. It's the fear of that they'll be pigeonholed into just that one thing. And I often even get people saying, "Oh, well, I've got 3 businesses, so how do I manage that on LinkedIn?" And my answer is always, well, you don't. pick the one that you want to be, because if you try to appeal to everyone, any social media platform, you appeal to no one, because you're not considered a specialist or whatever. You just got your finger in multiple sort of pies, and you probably do all of them, to an okay level, as opposed to, really focusing on one and doing it exceptionally well. So the reality is, you've got to be very, very targeted within that niche. And of course that niche has to be preferably cover two bases. One is that it's something that you are exceptionally good at, but also something that you're really passionate about doing. If you're not passionate about doing something, then it's a tough road to really put all of your marketing effort into that sort of, you don't really love doing.
Would you weight those 50-50? Obviously it depends, but is there one that you would weight more heavily than the other in terms of either being passionate or exceptionally good at, or do you think they're both sort of 50-50?
Obviously at the end of the day, could you be successful focusing on something that you're exceptionally good at but not passionate at? Yep, you probably could. It just wouldn't be, a great way to live. Could you do the reverse? Probably not. If you're not really, really good at what you do, then you're going to get called out on it pretty quickly.
Sure. I wanted to ask you a question from the audience for those listening, and she asks, "What is one of your biggest lessons you've learnt whilst conversing on LinkedIn?"
I think, that's a really good question. I think that the answer to that would be to be yourself. Don't try to be something that you're not. At the end of the day, people will really resonate with you, or they won't, and it's quite okay if they don't. Because again, if you're trying to appeal to everyone, you come across very sort of vanilla and bland. Whereas if you, like I said, if you're passionate about something and you're happy to take a stand on it, it's okay if some people don't agree, and you can just say that. I often say that, just agree to disagree, and I respect your opinion. I just don't have to agree with it. So so the lesson is really in just being yourself and being true to what you believe in.
Yeah, that's really sage advice. There'll be people that'll love you and people that'll hate you, and it's best not to bend your personality to what everyone else wants, because you end up not being anyone really in that sense. It's the same. I guess it's the same concept of niching in a sense.
It is. I actually talk about that quite a bit in Influencer, and one of the chapters there is about that. Is that it's not really our role as business owners or marketers or anything to actually change anybody's mind. Our role is to find and attract the people who already believe what we believe and already want what the value that we deliver, and just focus on them and don't worry about the other ones who aren't on board. There's someone else will serve them, and there's plenty to go around.
For sure. Yeah, there's so many people out there to serve. You don't need a million customers, and even a million in the concept of how big the world is a small number anyway. So
well, exactly right, and especially in this day and age where other than say a brick and mortar type businesses like a restaurant or whatever, where you literally have to be within a certain area, many businesses now can really be global. And that's a two-edged sword, though, because it also means that, you might be in a high-cost country like the US or Australia or Singapore or whatever, competing with people who have probably equal talents in countries where the cost of doing business is maybe a quarter of yours. So, you have to be exceptional to be able to compete on a global scale.
Comes back down to being, both exceptional at what you do and passionate as well, to both, carry through that global competition and really be a mainstay.
Yeah, it is, and focusing on that, that one core niche, because there's plenty of that niche around. It's just you've got to, position yourself as the absolute authority in that space.
For sure. And something that you're quite passionate about is giving. And I know you've got an involvement with B1G1, and recently we had the chairman, Paul Dunn, on the show, and you've made over 1.4 million giving impacts. I wanted to know how your partnership with B1G1 has impacted your business.
Look, B1G1, we've been a member of B1G1 since the day we started. And it came down to, I just by chance, I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at an event where Paul Dunn was the other speaker. That's how I met Paul. And of course, he was sharing about what V1G1 does, and I just immediately said, to Paul, I've been looking for this my whole life, and it just totally resonated with us from day one. And we pretty much, just ingrained a social policy into everything we do. So, when somebody does one of our online training courses, it immediately means that 1,000 families get access to water. Or when somebody reads, buys one of my books, they'll be creating an impact to prevent blindness with children or educate children or something like that. So every product or service that we have has some form of social responsibility attached to it. And as you said, we've just by doing that, I think we're at about 1.5 million impacts around the world. Our personal internal goal is for that to hit 12 million. So that's we're, in our terms, we're only kind of 10% of the way there.
That's a really admirable goal to reach, and it's such a great platform to be able to, like you said, to make social impact on a global scale and link it to everything that your business does. From every product or service that you provide, then that provides, sanitary needs or a range of other giving impacts to those desperately in need of those services. So yeah, it's great that you've got a goal of to reach 12 million.
Thank you. We will hit it. I can't give you the date, but at some point in the future, it's just an everyday part of everything we do. So every month we inch closer and closer to that goal.
For sure. And the fact that you've got it so ingrained in what you do is you're going to make progress, no matter what, and you've got that orientation. So I'm sure you'll get there for sure.
I'm sure we will.
Adam, a question I'd like to ask all guests on the podcast, and I'd love to get your opinion on it, is what's your definition of the grind?
The grind is, I think it's, for me, it's definitely around passion. Depends, I suppose, on how you view grind. I think it has a lot of negative connotations. I believe if you're focusing on doing what you love every single day, then you just love to do the same thing over and over. I suppose in one way that's a grind.
For sure. Adam, where can people find more about you and Web Traffic That Works?
But probably the best thing, interesting enough, we're literally going through a change of name for the company very, very soon in the next few weeks. Our name will change to Prominence Global as opposed to Web Traffic That Works. But right now, the best place to connect with us is probably through my personal website, which is just adamhoulihan.com.
No worries. I'll include a link to that in the show notes where people can click on and find a bit more about what you're up to.
Thanks for that.
No worries, Adam. Thanks again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about LinkedIn and diving a bit deeper into what people can do to build their profile, to build their prominence, and to become to inch their way up to be one of the top of the 1% or even further. So thank you for sharing. Thanks for listening to this episode of Stories Behind the Grind. Please share the podcast, and if you're not already subscribed, be sure to do that right now. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could do me a quick favor and rate and review the podcast. This lets the platform know that I'm doing something right and people like the content. It'd be a huge help, and I'd be really, really grateful if you could. Until next time.